Nike couldn't afford that. They couldn't go after that many. They didn't have a lot. They needed to make a big bet, and they needed it to go well. So Vaccaro said, you know what, let's just go for the top. Let's spend our entire athlete budget on this young kid, Michael Jordan. Now, at the time, though, it didn't make sense. First off, Michael Jordan wanted to play for Adidas. He wanted Adidas to sign him. He wasn't an established star, blowing the entire... Welcome to the Swedish Wealth Institute podcast. I am your host, Daniel Wood, and welcome to our final episode on Nike. This is, to me, one of the most inspiring journeys of entrepreneurship. How Phil Knight came up with the idea of Nike by looking at a different industry, right? He was looking at cameras and going, well, if the Germans can be undercut by the Japanese manufacturing, why not do that in other things? And obviously, as a runner and his background and being trained by Bowerman, who loved experimenting with shoes, he saw there was an opportunity for innovation. He saw that lower price would make an impact. And, well, he wrote it as his Stanford paper. He went to Japan on his world tour as a kid. He met with Onitsuka, and without even owning a company, he convinced them to make him their distributor for North America. From there, had to wait 2 years before he actually got his first shoes, but then was able to convince Bill Bowerman, his coach, to come on as his partner. They started, well, what was then Blue Ribbon Sport. They ordered shoes, and Phil started selling. They sold. They brought in Jake Johnson, who opened their first retail location. They kept expanding. 5 years later, Phil leaves his job as an accountant, goes full-time into Nike. They get thrown out of their first bank. They later get thrown out of their second bank. They have the problems with Onitsuka, who who want other distributors and who don't trust the Blue Ribbon Sports to be their distributor. They want to grow and create more brands. Bill Bowerman writes the book, Jogging, that makes the sport of jogging explode and is why we go out running today. And he invents the waffle shoe, which takes which just creates completely different grip, takes the world by storm. They do it with the Nike brand. And thanks to a Japanese trading company, they're able to get new manufacturing for their own brand, their own shoes. There is lawsuits with Onitsuka on stealing brands, on breaking contracts. All of that mess is going on. And Nike, which is now Nike, which came because Phil did not have more time to deliberate, and they had the swoosh created by their designer for her fee of $35. And she actually got, a couple $million worth of shares in the end, so she's fine. That became the start of Nike. They started selling shoes, they started expanding, and decided they needed to get athletes to sponsor them because their shoes had a certain quality, right? They were cheap to make. They had a quality because they had international manufacturing, and they worked. So a lot of the athletes used them. They just weren't sponsored by them. So when the game started, they had to switch shoes. Now, Nastase, the tennis star, was there first, but the one that was the most central to the beginning of Nike was Prefontaine. So let me share the story of Pre. So Steve Roland Prefontaine was born in 1951 in Oregon. So he was a local kid, and he was special. So he hated being ordinary. He would outwork everyone else. So as a freshman in high school, he was not even the best runner on his local high school team, but he outworked everyone else. And by 15 years old, he ran the national high school record for 3,000 meters. Back then, that was 8 minutes, 41 and a half seconds. And during the final 2 years of high school, he was unbeaten in cross-country running. So obviously everyone wanted him, but Bowerman was the guy in running. He would end up in his time, he had the most sub, was it 4-minute mile runners of anyone. And Pre was from Oregon and decided to join Bowerman. So this was in 1969, and he was pushed. Bowerman pushed hard. He wanted you to be really, really good. He cared about the training, the recovery, the shoes, the biomechanics, surface, all of this. And of course, the mindset and psychology. Now, Pre was different. So running, which most runners don't know, but I shouldn't say, I'm definitely not a runner, so don't take me as that. But I have run a marathon. I've done a few triathlons. I've done a half Ironman. So I have a little bit of experience of the pain of running. And what it turns out is it's not just, you don't just get up and run. There's strategy involved in this. And when you're doing that, when you're racing, you conserve your energy by being behind someone, right? Getting a little less air. You let someone else pull. Pre never did that. So Pre's whole thing was that he would run. He would go to the front. He would run as hard as he could, and he would dare everyone else to try to keep up. He wanted to show you that he would not beat you by strategy. He would beat you because he was better. So this worked in college. He won 7 NCAA titles, and he crushed, the 3-mile run. And overall, so according to Nike history, he won 35 of 38 races. And the thing was, again, he wasn't running the strategy. He was crushing. So he became a bit of a myth, right? It was defying the rules, being fearless, doing it your way, right? It was a show. And this is important because this is what attracted Phil. Phil became a diehard Pre fan, and he wanted to work with him. He just wanted to help him. He wanted to be a part. Now, remember, back then in college, kids were not allowed to earn money from their sports. So you couldn't sponsor them. You couldn't give them stuff. He couldn't be a part, but he could be a fan. And that was what Phil was. Now, in 1972, Pre qualified for the Munich Olympics in 5,000 meters. So he was 21 years old, and he was racing, experienced runners. And Pre, as always, did not follow the rules. He ran, and he actually takes the lead with 1,600 meters to go. So about a third of the race left, and he pushes. But the last lap is where he collapsed. Finnish runner Viren wins. Mohamed Gamoudi takes second, and Ian Stewart takes bronze. And Prefontaine finished fourth, 13:28.4, and he was less than a second behind Ian Stewart for the bronze. Now, what's kind of cool about that is this became a part of his mythos about doing it your way, about never giving up, never surrendering, and not running by the rules, even though that cost him his win. Now, the good thing is, as soon as Pre finished college, then he could start working with Nike. And he actually became a sales consultant, essentially, as their sponsor. So he would travel to schools, to colleges, running clubs, stores, and talk about running and work with young athletes and start building up the dream of running and what Nike actually meant. And this was powerful because this started building relationships at a deeper level than Jake Johnson could do. Jake became their friend, right? That was his whole thing. He knew everyone, and he was sending letters with everyone. Pre was this mythical figure, this athlete, this star who was there, who would show them, who would teach them, would coach them, and would recommend them Nike. Of course, just because college was over was not the end of Pre's running career. He was aiming for the 1976 Montreal Olympics. So he knew that he had screwed up in Munich. 4 years later, he was going to win. But on May 29th, 1975, Prefontaine wins a 5,000-meter race. Later that night, he was partying with other athletes. He leaves after midnight, driving his car, and he crashes on Skyline Boulevard. The car flips. He's trapped underneath, and Prefontaine dies at the scene. He's 24 years old. The place is now known as Pre's Rock. This shook the running world. It shook athletes all over the world. It shook Nike, and it shook Phil to the core. Pre was gone. And this was Pre. This was their hero, who also was their biggest champion. This could have been a huge end to Nike, stop their momentum. And it almost did. But they kept fighting. They kept going. And they vowed to never forget Pre. And so that became one of the ethoses of Nike, is to push, is to attack, is to never give up, is to be Pre on the track. Even if you end up losing like he did at the Olympics, you lose on your own terms, not on their terms. This takes us a few years into the future. Almost a decade. Nike has, over this decade, grown. They have signed many, many athletes. They were huge in running, right? They had taken over running. They were moving into other sports, but one they just couldn't get into was basketball. Converse owned basketball back then. They had Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Julius Erving. And if you're not going to wear Converse in the NBA at the time or playing basketball, you're going to have Adidas. Adidas was, the top sports shoe in most sports. Nike was just a running shoe. Jordan loved Adidas. They needed to do something because Nike was having problems. They were trying to grow in more than just running. They were overextended. They needed to get into basketball because they needed to make their shoes cool. Now, what most brands did back then was they would sign many stars and they would grow the brand and grow those stars. That's how Converse over time ended up with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and Julius Erving and other athletes. Nike couldn't afford that. They couldn't go after that many. They didn't have a lot. They needed to make a big bet, and they needed it to go well. And this is, of course, where in the movie, if you've watched the movie of Nike, this is where Matt Damon's character comes in, Sonny Vaccaro. So Sonny Vaccaro is he is their basketball, guru, right? His job is to grow the team of basketball and get that working. Now he realizes, yes, we need to get one star, but we can't go after an established one. We're not going to be able to pull them over. So he started looking at the 1984 class. He sees, look, there are a few rookies we could sign. We could bet on multiple, see who goes well, build this brand slowly, but he didn't have the time. Phil was breathing down his neck. Phil was saying, are we going to shut this down? So Vaccaro said, you know what? Let's just go for the top. Let's spend our entire athlete budget on this young kid, Michael Jordan. Now, in retrospect, obviously, this is a brilliant, brilliant decision, right? Who better to sign than Michael Jordan? Now, At the time, though, it didn't make sense. First off, Michael Jordan wanted to play for Adidas. He wanted Adidas to sign him. Second, Michael Jordan he hadn't played in the NBA. He was a kid. But yes, he'd done great in as in high school and stuff, but he wasn't an established star. Blowing the entire budget is a huge, huge, huge risk. So the negotiation begins. So everyone did want Mike, obviously, but Converse had problems because they already had Magic, Bird, Dr. J. So they could give Jordan money, they could give him the Converse brand, but he wouldn't be the guy, right? He would be one of the guys. Now, for Adidas, the problem was that Adi Dassler had passed away. And so his family were right now kind of fighting about who was going to take over and what was going to happen with the company. So they didn't have the full focus on who to sign and what to sign. And basketball wasn't their core business anyway. So they made a bid, and they made a pretty good bid for Mike, but they didn't go all the way for Jordan. And David Falk, who was Jordan's agent, turned to Michael Jordan and said, look, we need to have this meeting. And so Sonny Vaccaro brought in Rob Strasser, who was the guy who was going to do a lot of this negotiating. And Falk actually is the one who called Jordan's parents, and tried to talk to them about looking at this offer seriously. Now, Michael was a good kid. He respected his parents. He looked up to his parents. And when his mother, Dolores, told him, you need to listen. You don't need to sign, but you need to take the meeting. He did. So they fly him out to Beaverton, and they make a whole pitch. They built a highlight reel set to the Pointer Sisters song Jump. They told him that they would build him his own shoe. They show him some of the designs. Jordan doesn't like the colors. He thinks it has too much red and black. He's calling it devil colors. And so they say, okay, we will change it. Right? So the pitch here, which the Jordan family is looking at and David Falk is looking at, is you can be one of the stars with Converse, right? You can be on that same level. Nike says, look, you're going to be the star. You are not just Magic Johnson or Larry Bird, which is crazy to tell a kid at that time. But David Falk also comes up with the name. So David Falk is actually pushing for this. His agent suggests, why don't we call the shoe Air Jordan? And this comes from partially, obviously, Jordan's, ability to essentially fly. It also comes from Nike that had this air technology in its shoes. So it kind of comes together beautifully. And so Nike offers Jordan by far their biggest offer ever. It was 5 years, $2.5 million, which apparently won a Guinness World Record because it was listed as October 26, 1984. It was worth 3 times as much as any other NBA endorsement at the time, which basically is also why Converse couldn't counter it, because if they were going to give Michael Jordan $2.5 million over 5 years, they'd have to match it with Magic Johnson and Bird because, they're the real stars. So Nike went all in, and they do it. And well, the rest is history. Michael Jordan becomes the Nike spokesperson. He starts wearing the Air Jordan shoes, and Jordan crushed his his first season. And now there were some rules in there, right? Nike could back out if he turned out to be a flop. But Michael Jordan averaged over 28 points per game. He won the Rookie of the Year. He became an all-star and was already a star on the field. Now, one thing that is pretty cool is there were rules to how your shoes had to look on the field. They had to be white. They were only allowed to have a limited amount of color. But the Air Jordans had too much color. They had too much of that red and black, and they worked with Michael, obviously, so he would like them. But that meant that every game he stepped on, he actually got fined for wearing the shoes. So Nike covered those fines. This made it a whole deal, right? It was something that was talked about on TV after the game, as well, of course, Michael being the star that he became. Nike and Air Jordan went down to grow like crazy. The Jordan brand has become a whole incredible growth and explosion. Today, as we know, Nike is one of the largest companies in the world, and they dominate the athletic wear and sports. And it all started with a kid that loved to run, that loved to compete, that got cut from his local baseball team, that wanted to show his coach that he could be special, even though he wasn't as good a runner. He wanted to show his dad that his idea wasn't crazy. He wanted to show the world what he could do. And he kept every time putting all of everything he could into his dream. He placed bet after bet, and he won. Phil Knight is not your average CEO. He's not your average person, but he did it. And I am very happy that you joined me on this journey, because to me, this story is an inspiration and one we should all hope to emulate as entrepreneurs. And so I hope you took something great from this story. Next week, we're going to be going back to our normal interviews. I have, during this period of making this special show of Nike, I've interviewed some absolutely amazing people. So next week, we'll be back interviewing Celine DaCosta, John Gray, and other absolutely amazing authors and absolute superstars, and bringing you that here through the show. I want to thank you so much for joining us here today. And as a thank you, I want to say that I have a gift for you. I would love it if you subscribe to the show, just like thousands of people have done all over the world, either through YouTube or any podcast platform that you use, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, whatever you like to listen on. And if you want to give us a review, obviously a 5-star review would be appreciated. That would be amazing. Now, I also want to let you know that, like I said, I have a gift for you, and we've actually built a new, easier to use version of our events page. So we'll link to that in the show notes. It's swedishwealthinstitute.com/events. It's a lot prettier now. I hope you'll agree. Let us know in the comments. And we have 3 events for you right now that you can go and register for. One is a live event in Stockholm. If you can come, it would be amazing. We're going to give you a free ticket to see Ken Honda and Janet Atwood. And we have 2 further events. One, the 23rd to the 26th of July, which is a virtual event for the European time zone, featuring speakers like the author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, John Gray, the creators of Chicken Soup for the Soul, Jack Black and Mark Victor Hansen, both of which who've been on the show, and John Gray is one of our soon to be coming out episodes. We got Janet Atwood, we got Marcy Shimoff, we have Brian Tracy, Dr. John DeMartini, Nick Vujicic, Rob Moore, and many, many, many other absolutely amazing speakers. So I hope you're excited for that. And the week after, the 30th of July to the 2nd of August, we're bringing the same lineup for the North American time zone. So wherever in the world you are, pick your time zone, pick your event, and I hope I see you there. Thank you so much for joining us. This was the Swedish Wealth Institute podcast. I am Daniel Wood, and I appreciate you spending the time with us. Thank you.